As the economy flounders, the hike in the benchmark lending rate from 15% to 16% by the Central Bank of Nigeria may not provide the much-needed succor for the productive sector of the economy or ease unemployment, inflation, and poverty. Emerging from the 6th Monetary Policy Committee meeting of 2022, the CBN Governor, Godwin Emefiele, noted that a policy in the monetary policy rate by 100 basic points was primarily to tamp down inflation and to avoid overheating the financial system. But the organized private sector disagrees, insisting that the move will further weaken the manufacturing sector and stifle small businesses. Well, joining me to discuss this, of course, virtually, and to give some analysis, expert analysis of this development of the growth of the micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises, the founder, MSME Africa, Sheye Olurotimi. Thank you very much for joining us at this point.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me on the show today.
Well, amid the furious headwinds lashing the economy, the CBN's exertions have failed so far to tame inflation, stimulating the productive sector, or rescue the critical micro, small, and medium enterprises sector to boost job creation and diversify export and revenue sources. Now, what do you make of this new interest hike?
The CBN has an explanation for it, and but we need to look at what CBN is thinking, and let's look at what actually is the impact of this on the MSME sector. So CBN says this is meant to help check inflation, because we know that inflation is when too many when you have when there is probably scarcity, and then you have money chasing limited commodity, there is a tendency for a hike in price, and that's probably why we have inflation. So CBN says this is going to help check inflation, because when there is increased interest rates, what happens is that there is reduction in spending, and so that might help to check inflation in some way. But we need to understand that this actually has serious adverse effects on the micro, small, and medium enterprises sector in a lot of ways. Because what it means is that there is going to be shrinking production. Why is that going to happen? Because the cost of capital has gone up. It means that if I get a loan and I'm paying so naira as the interest before, now I have to pay a lot more. So the cost of getting capital is getting higher, and it also means that production cost is going up, and so it's a big problem when you also want to try to imagine that we already have high energy costs, we have foreign exchange scarcity, we have inflation that we are dealing with, and a lot of things that are tending to mitigate. Trying to actually hinder the micro, small, and medium enterprises from doing what they are meant to do. We need to also know that a lot of these people that make up the MSMEs in Nigeria, which are about 39.6 million, according to the last survey, a large chunk of them are actually manufacturers. Now they have to spend a lot more to produce per unit, and they are facing a market where people are not even willing to pay for 1 naira more to buy what they are selling. So it's a lot of problem. It's not going to all go well for the MSME sector. I need to say that. CBN seems to have a justification for it, but looking at the impact on the sector, I think it is a big issue that needs to be seriously addressed.
Well, the CBN's policy, a lot of people believe is going to strengthen the MSME sector. But what do you think of its monetary policies and, of course, in ensuring that MSMEs are strengthened and they can perform optimally?
Okay, so maybe on the long run, it could strengthen the sector because inflation could be checked. But let's bring it down to the practicalities of it. It means that some of the loans that these MSMEs have gotten now, they will have to pay higher interest rate. It also means that both businesses and consumers are cutting down on spending. So how is reduced spending from my consumers going to benefit me, right? Let's look at what is applicable now, especially because we know that right now a lot of things are not happening like they should happen. If I buy something today for 10 naira, next week I go back, it's now 15 naira. in the midst of all of this, we're increasing interest rate. Yeah, it might have a good a good effect on the long run, but right now it is actually a serious issue that if care is not taken, most of these MSMs are meant to benefit when we start getting the actual intention of CBN. Will have died. A lot of them will have probably will not be in business anymore if you're not careful.
Okay, how will this, you mentioned that in the long run it might have a great effect, a better effect. How will that happen when in the short run you're having MSMEs winding down because of high inflation?
Exactly, that's my major concern, right? We're saying when we increase interest rate, we will strengthen the sector. But let's look at this. When we came into 2022, there was a report by Smedan and National Bureau of Statistics to say that the number of MSMEs has dropped from 41.5 million that we had according to 2017 survey. Now we have 39.6. That's about 2 million drop in the numbers of MSMEs. It means that the pressure is actually a lot more, and a lot of people are dropping by the wayside. A lot of them have discontinued business. We want to attribute that to COVID, but I don't think COVID is the only culprit in this case. Now, we also have a lot of them now in the what we call the nano sector, right? You know, in reality, we talk more of micro, small, and medium enterprise. That's MSME. Now we have nano. And nano means that they are even lower, they are doing lower than the micro, which was meant to be the lowest in the sector before. So we have a lot of them in the nano sector. It means that their revenues are dropping because this calculation is a function of revenue and some other things. Revenues are dropping gradually. And so if there's anything we target as benefit in the long run, these MSMEs might not live to see it because a lot of them are actually dropping. A lot of them are dying because they cannot continue because of the serious effect of inflation, forex, and every other thing in between. So I don't see how we can actually marry all of these things together.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but we also know that the significant role MSME play to the growth of the economy, both locally and globally, now that's given its massive contribution to the GDP. With all you have said, how best can MSME survive this harsh operating environment and unabated macroeconomic challenges?
Okay, so like you rightly noted, MSMEs are very important in the economy. They contribute close to 50% to the GDP of the country and even Africa, and they are responsible for about 80% of employment. Now that sector is seriously threatened, I think one of the things MSMEs can do, like I tell entrepreneurs that I work with and the ones that I have opportunity to interface with, you have better control over your costs than you do over your revenue. It might seem like I don't know what I'm saying. So MSMEs need to cut down a lot on costs. They need to cut down that cost that is not necessary, totally necessary. You need to cut down on it. You might want to rethink whether you actually need a physical office at this time or you just want to do it virtual and save cost on rent. And I also believe that MSME, this is now the time for them to embrace technology like never before.
Okay.
Technology will make you cut down on cost, even though the initial cost of putting technology in place might actually be a bit big. But you're going to save a lot more on cost at the end of the day. Technology makes life a lot easier. It makes sure that you don't need to have physical presence in a lot of places and you can reach a lot more because this is the time to actually target the market beyond Nigeria, beyond Africa. Technology will make you reach market outside of where you are. So we need to cut down on cost. We need to embrace technology. And I think government too should come up with policies. We need to come up with incentives. They need to come up with palliatives. Yeah, palliatives that can actually help to ameliorate the situation right now. They need to look at that sector and say, if this sector dies, 50% of our GDP is threatened, and we need to actually take decisive actions to ensure that these guys stay afloat. I mean, look at the tech guys, the startups that we thought they were actually doing a lot better than traditional MSMs. Now, in the last 3 months, we've seen a lot of them laying off their employees. It's been massive. It means that those guys are also threatened, and we need to really, really sit down with ourselves and ask ourselves, are we really, really serious about sustaining this economy, or we just want to leave everything to go the way they want to go? And that will have serious consequences on the economy at the end of the day.
So to the growth of startups now, or MSMEs, like you said, funding is one critical part in their growth. How do you think MSMEs can fund their operations despite the inflationary rates that we are experiencing?
Yeah, so the funding challenge had always been there. If you gather 10 MSMEs in a room and ask them what their major problems are, I'm sure none of them will tell you funding is a big problem. PwC came up with a report that says that we have a funding gap of about, I think, 670 billion naira for the MSME sector, which means that gap needs to be filled if we really want to fund MSMEs adequately. So how can they actually bridge the gap? I think it's something that MSMEs cannot do on their own. All the players, all the stakeholders need to come together. The banks the financial institutions need to sit down with the operators and the government so that government can come up with policies. The financial sector players can come up with the things that the MSMEs will need. And MSMEs will also come up to say, this is what we need.
Okay.
And everybody sit down on the table and agree on how this funding problem would be solved. Then alternatively, what traditional MSMEs should start looking into is how to also attract funds from venture capitalists, because a lot of MSMEs just believe I want to own all the business by myself, and they don't want to embrace equity funding. So this is the time for everyone to embrace, for MSMEs to embrace a lot of equity funding, which means that they should be willing to cede some part of their ownership to the investors. And so it's better to own 10% of something very big than own 100% of something extremely small. So MSMEs should be open to equity funding. They should be open to venture capitalists. They should be more open to angel investor. And I also know that the Nigerian Stock Exchange has come up with a lot of initiatives that can see MSME actually also stock exchange, which would enable them to be able to attract funding from the public. So they should embrace all of this instead of just sitting down with the traditional method that has not yielded funding, and I don't think will yield funding for them. They need to just be more open-minded. They need to work on their records and their books so that they can be very attractive to this alternative source of funding.
Okay, so let's take a look at the prospect of startups in the country. Nigeria, despite its volatile business environment, has seen the number of startups springing up and getting global investment. What do you think is the rationale behind this growth?
Yeah, so officially now, Lagos is the startup capital for Africa.
I agree.
And so we are getting, yes, Lagos, it used to be Nairobi, now Lagos it is for Africa. And that's something to applaud. And I think what those guys are doing well, if you ask me, is that they have what I can call a playbook that spells out how they already before they start, they already have a plan to attract funding. They have scaling in mind. That's the difference between the startup and the MSMEs. The MSME just want to do business. The startup have scaling. They want to scale their business. And they already have that in their plan from the very beginning. And that's what investors are looking for. When they see that you can scale, that whatever you sell in Nigeria, you can sell in Nairobi, you can sell in New York, you can sell everywhere, they will give you the funding. So that is what actually I believe is bringing about the funding that they keep getting. They have good business model. They're able to demonstrate that they can scale up their operations and they can actually reach larger markets. And of course, if I'm an investor, when I see that, I want to invest in that business.
Finally now, what is your overall assessment of the performance of MSME space for the year 2022? And of course, give us your projection for the coming year.
If I were to assess the MSME sector for 2022, like I said, we started the year with the news that the numbers of MSMEs have dropped. And that tells me that there are a lot of things that we need to think about. It means that the environment has not been very, very conducive and is not the best for MSMEs. So I think this year, what MSMEs have done is just to stay afloat. I see a lot of them just trying to stay afloat and say, let me just keep existing. So I have not seen a lot of expansions for MSMEs. I've seen a lot of them just trying to survive. And I also want to believe, looking forward to 2023, the election will actually determine a lot of things. And of course, we know in election years or the month preceding election, there are probably a lot more spending. So I see some more money in circulation in the next few months towards election. And then whatever happens at the election will actually determine the fate of the MSMEs, because the policies that the government will churn out would determine how well and how far the MSMEs would go in 2023.
All right, thank you very much for talking to us at this point. Oluseyi, thank you so much for giving us your insight into the happenings in the sector. Of course, it's been a very robust discussion. Of course, founder MSME Africa, Sheye Olurotimi, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show today.